Ladies and gentlemen and folk of the audience, Austin is a stinky liar.
About what? What did I do now? You can't ambush me like this.
One, you did a spew punk about Bloomborough without me, which feels insane. But also, before this started recording, you were giving me sass for not having updated my Audacity. And then when it was updated and I told you, you still acted incredulous when I hadn't spoken up again and reminded you to start recording.
Oh, that's a lot of inside baseball. I was saying you shouldn't update Audacity because you never know where they're going to add some new gizmo or gadget that's going to fuck everything up. I think once you have a version of it that works, you stick with it.
Well, so I have noticed on my recording track at the end is just a clock with a big hammer that smashes everything that comes next. That's an okay kind of gizmo to have on my Audacity page, all right?
Yeah, you got the sarcasm module in there, so every time you try to compliment me, it just comes off really shitty. I hate the new Audacity.
Austin, your hair's so good.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing you said, well, thank you for shouting out the bonus show we do, Spew Punk, which listeners on the main feed should definitely check out for just $1 at patreon.com/Austin Yorsky. I appreciate that.
Austin Yorsky has to have a damn good reason why he did a Bloomborough discussion without Quinn, so go check it out and find out why. Audience.
Yeah, I don't want to give away too much of our premium content, but I think if you check in there, you'll find Dan saying, I haven't seen any of the cards, and me saying, I really wish they had done something different with the ferret. And that's basically it. We briefly talked about how frog tongues work, but you'll be surprised at how little Magic the Gathering content occurred.
So Dan didn't say anything about the competitive viability of Storm in our standard format?
No, he didn't really. He didn't weigh in on mice and if Valiant is actually heroic, coming back for a second hurrah, or if it's much, much weaker. He didn't say anything about the viability of the graveyard strategy and limited. It seems like rats are really reliant on it.
It really feels like Dan didn't have anything to say about Bloomborough then.
When you think about it, yeah, I was really hoping to get his hot take on the bats and if it was worth using the Offspring mechanic to do that new Dark Confidant bat. But surprisingly, he said, I haven't seen any of these cards, Austin.
He said, what are you referring to? I only collect the ones with pumpkins on them.
Literally, yes, that's what he said. Go listen to that bonus episode. We have 75 of those now, many of which are 2 hours long, so you never need content again, I think. Listen.
It is just $1. Not to do one of those sales things, but it is one of those things, we I guess are limiting ourselves to never mention it 10 degrees, so I will try to at least make it entertaining. For just $1, you get so much nonsense. You get to hear me talk about Chaperone before Chaperone was even a thing. You'd get to hear the Spew piece, our annual award based off of the most forgettable Pokemon with a similar name to our show. And you know what? You get to hear about Spit and Mouths, which is what everyone is here on the internet to crave.
Yeah, those ones are specifically going to be marked with graphic content warnings from now on. We shocked a couple of people, so the ones where we really just discuss hardcore pornographic acts are going to be labeled.
Yeah, there were a couple of my nuns from high school started writing into the show.
Yeah. It was really shocking for Chaperone to find out about herself from you because it was before she was a thing. I got to say, that was one of our biggest coups in the history of the show.
Yeah, I thought I would educate this young girl from the Midwest. Just be like, hey, what if you dressed up in drag and wrote some extremely queer pop songs? And lo and behold, she did. I feel like Hulk Hogan right now. For those of you who don't know, Hulk Hogan famously is hated within a lot of professional wrestling circles because he just takes credit for everything in wrestling, no matter how minor his involvement was. He tried to take credit for The Undertaker because he saw him play basketball before he was a wrestler. He's like, I basically made The Undertaker.
Incredible. No, I mean, you really were. I mean, I know it's a gauche for you to say this, but you were really ahead of the game on that one. That was a full year before she really broke through.
It was still TikTok is where a lot of those kinds of things, spawn from. For every chaperone, I have, 150, beach smedgies or whatever that have never taken off and only exist on TikTok.
Yeah, the beach smedgies have some real bops, but their lyrics are complete gibberish. I think that's really what's keeping them from stardom.
Well, it's because, I have a theory. It does seem as though they got halfway through writing their name. They picked one normal word and then one nonsense word. And I think maybe they kind of just stayed too close on the nonsense train after that.
It's like they really didn't commit to the bit.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Feels like if you weren't willing to go 100% on the name, maybe the whole project should have been scrapped.
We're going to be so embarrassed when it turns out Smedgies was critical to deciphering their concept album, you know, and they have a whole cycle like Coheed Cambria, and like they flesh it out in the comics.
Yeah. Oh, and they stop a bullet aimed at the president or something like that. Yeah, they're superheroes.
Whoa, timely content. We're 5 minutes in. What we're here to do tonight is Crew Gunk, the show where we interview each other about our Dice Funk characters. I'm also going to ask you some questions about DMing because this is the first time you've done so for Dice Funk, the main show. You know, you did some one-shots, beloved things like Inheritors and Guns, Puns, and Justice. But this is a special milestone for you, I think, doing such a big
season.
Project.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so.
So let's start off with a sponsor question from Faith and Valor. Do you think Austin ever compares the list of Dice Funk patrons to the end credits of Bomber Guy vids to gauge overlap? And Joseph Tumbrello. I'm pretty sure
I thought that was your question to me. I was like,
no.
It's so weird you're referring to yourself in the third person, but let me try to consider this question.
No, the patrons have gotten very clever. They're using their platform now to make me say things that are confusing because they know that's how I'm going to read them in here.
Yeah.
But okay, in the lead up to this season, how nervous were you and how well do you think it's going so far? This is the big question because I was spending a lot of time around you, watching you pull your hair out, poring over a big book that said Giants on the front. And now the Giants out there. Where are you at emotionally? Fourth dry arc.
Yeah, so it's a lot. The fourth dry arc was also sort of a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, not a planned arc necessarily. This was sort of something you were like, I think everyone's really enjoying this season. Why don't we go a little bit longer? So this was a little bit of a moment of like, oh no, I have to invent something. I have to craft something. And then you're like, well, that's what I've done this entire adventure so far. So let me go to the drawing board and figure something out. Figure what we can do as an interesting story, and I had a lot of ideas written down prior to the season for different concepts just to run with like vibe checks and things like that. So I had luckily some ideas in the chamber I could work off of.
Yeah, I think behind the scenes, I was saying that, we just sent White away. So it would be like, do we just time skip to when he comes back? Would that be satisfying? I was also saying that, Stranger has this whole character built around turning into different creatures. And Dan only got to be, I think, a bear and a snake at that point. He didn't do a single transformation during the ACH vibe check. So I was like, oh, we got to get some more opportunities for Dan to turn into things because I know how excited he was about that. So I was like, what if, we kind of do some more stuff in the gap between when White leaves and when White returns. So that was kind of where we got to this one. The audience just heard the arrival of the cannibals, which we're all very excited about. So I think it's pretty clear how much people love your setups. They're always very exciting.
I try. I do try. There are things I consider myself decent at, and things that I've eventually learned to say that I'm decent at. Even if I may not have the utmost faith in them, but I do consider myself relatively decent at creating cliffhangers, because those are the moments that I think are really easy to get like a great reaction from as well. Like you can, if you're writing almost as a form of like seeking validation, it's where you get one of the biggest kind of jolts from is when you do a good cliffhanger.
Next question from Simon Lee, Conduit of Chungus, Bearer of Dinkus, Minion of John Con, Jewman Jack, and Polite Crow asking if you might kindly open the bin for a little rummage. What were you most surprised about with the players interacting with your setting and your preparation? Because, I know you did a lot of work to set the table, and then we come over and start kicking shit over. How much has that given you grief?
I think it's actually been really good. I mean, I didn't really come in with too much of an expectation. I think I try to have a little bit of a playground approach to having NPCs, which is like, okay, if they're only ever going to exist in this one scene, can I do something with them that's at least going to make them somewhat memorable? And then if the audience, if one of the players, I guess rather, decides that they're like, oh, I want to, engage with this a little bit further. I want to talk to this NPC more. Then it's just like extra addition. Like I don't try to like plan to be like, oh man, I hope they talk to Mox because like I can't control if anyone necessarily have that interest. And also it's the season where the downtimes were going to be focused on other player characters. So it was an extra little level of trying to be like, all right, well, what level should the NPCs be at then? I don't want to have too many NPCs with like, I have a dark, mysterious past, knowing that like that might never get a chance to be explored or whatnot. Like, I don't know. I just try to come up with fun ideas, and there's been really cool things. I never intended a random throwaway line from Parks to suddenly become like, ooh, Parks is a robot built in the bad times. He has to learn to be progressive.
Oh, that's the second time in this show's history you've accidentally done that one. But this is a good segue. I'll say the next question from Extellaris Concept, champion of the Crab Salute and Lime. How have you been feeling about the player-to-player downtimes?
They've been, I think, very interesting. As a player, it's a unique perspective because you're interacting with someone whose adventures you're familiar with, but in an acting sense, your character has not been around for them, so you'd only have heard of them in stories, but you're also trying to find, as then like the writer and storyteller, like, okay, what are like the commonalities between our characters? Like, what do we want our ships passing by in the night kind of moment to be about, sort of thing. Just trying to like find like where those unique connections are between the characters, because they're not going to get explored over like, a multiple 3-act structure or anything like that. They're just going to be this kind of moment. It's like, okay, where are those cool intersections for our characters?
Are you excited to go back to NPC to player character downtime for the next one? Because we are doing that.
I think I am always, first and foremost, there are, I guess, nothing that's straight up off the table. If I go into the next downtime and I'm like, I want my downtime scene to be with Joseph Jojo or whatever, who's one of the players. I'm not trying to spoil anyone who's on next season or anything like that. I don't think you would stop me necessarily if I was like, no, I really think this is what's necessary for the story. But I think also I really do like getting to expand and talk to the NPCs. I think as both a DM and then as somebody who wants to be a player who enriches a DM's experience, I would like to talk to you about your NPCs and get to know more about them. I know you can always come up with such delightful and wonderful stories for your characters.
Oh, thank you for saying so. Speaking of characters, we can start moving to xXBlackEbonReaperXx, your player character for the season.
I thought it was one of our patrons. I was like, what a cool name.
Sponsored by Eardrum Espresso, C.A. Little, and Christman finally changing his Patreon name. What was the creation process like for this character? I know you were really excited about it, and I was a little nervous because you're like, I'm going to intimidate everyone I see. Not to jump ahead of you, but I thought it worked out really well. Like, it's been a blast for me personally.
Yeah, I think the character was, it's obviously lifted from, Shadow the Hedgehog, and then who Shadow the Hedgehog is then lifted from Vegeta. Like, it's that very similar thing of just like, yeah, I'm playing in that sort of space, but I wanted to find my own way to have a take on it while also kind of like playing at what makes those characters kind of cool, like doing those things where like, you know what, all things said, Shadow is actually a pretty fucking cool character when you think about it. And I think there was a lot of just interest in exploring it, and particularly with choosing intimidation. We always just talk about like, what are the skills? What are the things that have never really been used before in the show? Like, if you wanted to be like, oh, I want to have a character that focuses a lot on, persuasion checks, you have like 10 examples in Dice Funk's history. Like, we used that very frequently as a skill. We don't tend to be like an intimidating, like muscly aggression kind of group, on the show. So I thought, I was like, I want to have a character who does just really try to get their way through intimidating people. So I wanted to play that into the story and have a character who's a bit more, aggro, who had a bit more of that intensity to them, and just sort of stretch what I'm doing with characters. Plus, as someone who's now multiple years into their transition, I feel a lot more sort of secure in my femininity to explore female characters just in a different way. So this was a space I wanted to, which was like, what if my character was kind of like this stinky little loser 19-year-old edgelord who, she sometimes rolls really well, and she actually is pretty strong, but she's just like stunted significantly emotionally.
Yeah, I think each arc has revealed a little bit more about Reaper, and the intimidation checks have kind of almost stood in for, this is like unintentional, obviously we don't control the dice, but how people see her. So like in the first arc, you really botched the intimidation, and all the crabs were, they were like, you're so silly, and you were like very insecure about it. But then later you were intimidating first the Queen's Guard, who I think, a bunch of them ran away from you because you were kicking their ass, and then you just rolled on El Fago, who like rolled up into a ball. Like, you're getting more respect. You're actually being cooler. So I think it's really worked out.
Yeah, I like the overall arc her story has been able to go on. Obviously, the audience hasn't heard our fourth arc yet, so I'm going to do my best not to give any spoilers or anything. But I think so far the arc has really gone in the direction that I was really hoping it would, because I thought it would be a really satisfying one to explore and go through.
I actually have a question about that. Let's say sponsored by Nephist City of the Queer Sheep. In a Bad Place did an update name, almost done working for the fucking government at least. Congratulations on that. Squishy, Fishy, and Marine Science Guy. Are there any things with Reaper that either turned out the way you didn't expect, or that you would be interested in exploring it going in a different way? Like, what if you had just beat the pulp out of the Capeheart, so like absolutely made them your enemies? Or if you had lost the tournament, for example, the audience knows you won the World's Fair tournament. Are those interesting options to you? Have you given any thought to how those could have gone? Or are you just like so blessed with the choices and the dice that way they turned out?
Well, I don't know if there was ever a world where she just straight up beats up the Capehearts. I think it was an intentional move from a sense of making sure you have a cohesive player to the party, to not like actually, I think my character's like alignment was listed as like chaotic evil, but I was like, she is like the light spectrum of chaotic evil. She's just a selfish teenager essentially. But I didn't want to make her like too much of like a murder hobo or something like that, where this character is just like a ruffian for the Wild West, because I think that would have been kind of like a downer to the campaign. But even that, exploring in that space of like, what if she isn't, the Vegeta or whatnot, or Shadow the Hedgehog? Like, what if she's that character who is like kind of an edgelord and then just becomes a bad guy you have to stop? I'm trying to think of like a good example, and I don't know why the only one I'm thinking of is David, the sixth Animorph from the Animorphs books.
Wow, what a pull.
Yeah.
That's great.
But that was someone they had to deal with. So I was like, I don't necessarily want that to be the character. But I think the idea of Reaper losing in the World's Fair would have been very interesting. How Reaper handles loss, I think, was a very interesting and challenging space to explore, because you had to get into the idea of like, okay, I'm a 19-year-old. I really put kind of everything in my life into this. And what if I don't get it and I have no support system, really? Like, I haven't really been brought up with the best like coping skills.
Speaking of losing, let's say the next question is sponsored by Brent, still every episode of Dice Funk Goatly. A werewolf with a giant flying squirrel in their hand. Seriously, take a look at these guys. Wow, that's an image. And the space fighters. In the first arc, Reaper went down twice. First, the goblin shark mauled you, and then you kind of double KO'd, mutual KO'd Granny Capeheart. Yes. I'm just curious, if you could do that again, do you think there will be an interesting negative consequence there, like mechanically, or was that just too early? I don't know we've ever had someone go down so quickly. It wasn't intentional, it's just how it kind of worked out. Yeah,
it was just how the numbers rolled. That is hard to say, because I think it is tough to really define what would aesthetically or mechanically have really fit for Reaper so early on in her journey. I suppose there could have been maybe like a hit to her confidence or something like that. So maybe that was an option to consider. I like the idea of the character being more cocky and almost kind of like idiotically wrong at times. So I think maybe that was an option I was trying to, keep as a back pocket option. But I think, I don't know. It's tough. I've also had reached sort of a point where picking like lasting injuries has been somewhat a challenge. We've done this show so long, so there's only so many times you could say like, okay, my character gets like an eye cut off or something. Like the show sounds savage for like that's so casual, but like there's only so many times you could be like, I lose a limb, I have disadvantage on this thing, for you're like, okay, what's something I haven't really done that I could play with, or what's something I could work with. So I don't know, I'd have to maybe think and maybe find an option that would be thematically appropriate.
See, you really like novel injuries. It calls to mind the weekly manga recap, Bleach missing arm award or whatever you did over there.
First and foremost, that is a Nick-based award. Bleach was his personal baby, not mine. So all due credit to Nick. But yeah, like Bleach is a series where characters frequently just lost arms for really no reason. And to no consequence either. It never really handicapped anyone or inconvenienced anyone in any way to lose a limb, because immediately after a fight, someone would run over and they'd shoot energy at you and your injuries would heal. I like to try to make the injuries have a significance, to have a weight to them. And then to try to process how the character like goes about their life. I'm not always the best at it. I always, strive to improve. I'm not usually satisfied with most of the stuff I put out because I always want to do better. But I always want to look for a way to portray those as interesting choices and interesting consequences.
Yeah. The next question will be from Seiko, president of the White Wolf, Max, and Zoe fan club. That's 66% you. Congratulations.
Wow. Good job, Quinn.
And finally, that's a separate name. And Vibe Checkers, more like Vibe Raiders. Buzz. Gosh, wow. It really looks different when you read it out loud. The question I had in mind before I was thinking about vibrators was, how does Reaper feel about her party members? So I feel like Crew Gunk is an interesting opportunity to have like out of character conversations where it would like grind the episode to a halt. For me to just be like, hey Reaper, where are you at? But I am often curious, like how does your character actually feel about the party members, or like even other NPCs that you keep to yourself? Because you're, like you said, you're kind of a moody teenage character who isn't always just saying their feelings out loud.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I think when it comes to her party members, one of the things is that Reaper initially has, I think, a very strong level of just self-confidence. She really kind of looks down at anything that's not herself and her particular way of doing things. So even though she's able to like objectively look at like Barbella and Boyce and is like, oh, they have, what they do and I do what I do, she's also just like, shadow martial arts are better than what you're doing now. But as the arcs have gone along, I think I've been trying to showcase that she has grown a respect for them, that she eventually doesn't necessarily understand it. Like she doesn't understand some of like the smarts that are required to do what Boyce does, but she understands that he knows it, and she tries to hype up that essentially. Shown when she had confidence in Boyce succeeding in a tournament. And then Barbella, she's like, I don't get these riddles. I don't really understand how it gives you power, but you seem to get stronger for it, so I'm happy for you. And they had their moment where they kind of bonded with her, getting the remains in there and fulfilling that and answering the riddle. So I wanted to showcase those. As for the rest, I think she has a lot of different, thoughts on people. She slowly starts to like grow to see the characters we know as a bit of a community. She has sort of like an antagonistic relationship towards Bishop Bittercreek for a while. And then at the end of the one arc, she realizes like, oh, actually you're a member of this community and I kind of need you. And there's there's like a, assumed understandedness of like, I'm going to protect these people if something interfered with them. Like I may be, grumpy and moody with them, but they're my community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually had Hylia specifically because this will be full spoilers. The audience, hopefully listening to them in order, Hylia exploded, and I knew that was going to happen. So I had her in a downtime go to you and say, "Hey, please don't abandon this community because I've started some shit with President Slater and Storm Giant White." And like in character, I was like, "Oh, a Reaper says she's the strongest, so it makes sense to go to you, even though you're all at the same level." Technically, that's just like the reputation. Was that necessary? I still think I would have done it because it's like a fun character moment. But like, was there a chance of Reaper just being like, "Fuck it, I'm out," and then you have to roll up someone else? You're like, I am Quinn Capeheart. Yeah, I'm a crab.
100%. If a new character gets rolled up, it will be a crab. Note that. Am I teasing or am I foreshadowing?
Yeah.
I will say that I don't think it was 100% necessary, but I think it always helps to give the character direction. I wanted to play that Reaper is somewhat impressionable, that like if people seem like they're doing the right thing and like everything's, going along those lines, that she's just going to believe them because she doesn't really want to think about anything outside of like fighting and getting stronger. Like she doesn't want to think about like the logistics of anything. So when Hylia comes and it's like, I have an important mission and you're so strong and you're so cool and we need the strongest, coolest person to do it. Like of course she's going to be like, yeah, I guess I might as well. I don't know why she was British there, but
yeah. Yeah, so I was both trying to do in and out of character. One, I was just like doing a little foreshadowing of Hylia being like, if something were to happen to me, I need you to step up. But also, I just wanted to give you an out of character excuse so you don't just leave if you get you get everything you want.
Yeah, we can't really talk about it yet. But to the audience, we have finished recording the main chunk of the show. We're in sort of a second little extra addendum chunk. I don't know what we want to call it. I'll be very curious at the end of the season to get your thoughts on Reaper and anything I did with characters this season, because you usually have very strong thoughts on how Quinn does it.
I always have big thoughts. In fact, I'll say for the next question from Chase Sterling, Tara is giving money to say hi to all the cats. And
Aww.
Egon, god of death. Yes, the cats appreciate that. How do you feel about the big choices made so far? So there's more to come, but at this point, for example, there's the big one between the two factions of the Coral Kingdom. Does Reaper have strong thoughts about that? Does Quinn have strong thoughts? And do you agree with your character?
I do not agree with Reaper. Reaper is so much she doesn't care. She doesn't like understand or really think about, ideas like government or like or like any kind of like economy, nothing about that ever strikes her mind. So she hears it, she gets bored, and she's like, how about the strongest should determine it? Oh, no, nobody's on board with that. Okay, then I don't care. Because that's just the way. She's not going to be like, but think about the small folk, or, she's not going to do those. Like the farmers are getting screwed in this option. She doesn't have those sorts of opinions. She maybe will at times. She needs to get older. She needs to get more radicalized, essentially. But Quinn obviously does. I think it was a very interesting spot. Austin, as a DM, is very good for giving us those dilemmas where it's like, look, there is no clean option. You have to kind of make this choice, sort of almost like Spec Ops The Line. Like, I, as the creator of this narrative, am asking you, yes, there is no good option out of this, but what do you do? And I think those are fun, Kobayashi Maru's to kind of like solve. There was no clean, perfect, everyone win answers there, but I think the answer of summoning your god to swallow a child was pretty fucking metal.
Yeah, it took me by surprise. I didn't even know that was on the table necessarily.
Yeah.
I just kind of was just going with what Laura was giving me. But so you think if you had been Quinn Capeheart, the Homerid, you would have maybe done something else, and if you were yet a third character, maybe a different choice. It was very like you're in it. That's how you think of these situations.
Yeah, I think it depends, I guess, on what the character. I guess if it's Quinn Capeheart, it's just me as a character. I probably would have tried to talk more to I can't remember his name, Seneschal Kilpatrick, I can't
Yeah,
remember.
Seneschal is his title. It's Kilpatrick is their last name.
Okay, was there a first name that I'm forgetting?
Nope, I never
Okay.
introduced first name.
Okay. So I think Quinn Capehart would have wanted to talk to Seneschal Kilpatrick a little bit more and try to like get a glean, because it does sound more like that's a slightly more democratic edge that I'd be in favor of, as opposed to some of the more brutal ruling stuff. I don't want to spoil, but I obviously at some point did have to ask you for notes about the Coral Kingdom's queen, as she is one of the options for the vibe checks. So I, knowing what I know about her, I think it would have been very interesting to try to explore that side of the dynamic of, here's someone connected to them who sort of like vehemently opposed what they did, and try to explore that. And I don't know. I think, that might have been an interesting story, but I really like the way it went. I think snake child eating is really the stuff that like metal religions are made out of.
Yeah, and the consequences are still unfolding. There's a lot of episodes left to go there. So, next question by Mickelvain, Spirit of Gender. Shrug, they greater than she greater than he. 666 Neopets 666, and I upped my donation so Austin can have a family, and you should too. How has been playing a monk this season? I think it's your first time with this class. It's got a lot of things to keep track of. You got your key points. You got all the different things you can do with your bonus action. Is it working for you? Or
I love monks. This is not the first time I played a monk. Katarina was a monk barbarian hybrid, and I almost feel like I may have played a monk somewhere else. I guess what was Young was technically a monk, I think, in one
Very
episode.
briefly.
So, and one that I always get such high praise for my portrayal of. So, always a great one to bring up. I love monk. I think I've always enjoyed playing monk in Dungeons and Dragons. Like, if you make me sit down and play like a casual game of Dungeons and Dragons, like I will consider monk at some point, regardless of party makeup. Currently, like you could be like, there's currently 3 monks already in the party. I'm like, what about a 4th? But I like how 5e made monks feel. There's a lot of fluidity in getting to make multiple attacks, and your character's feeling pretty like nimble, with a lot of like versatility in how they kind of control the battlefield and things like that. I like the different options for flurry of blows and the flexibility that provides. There's a couple features to monks that aren't crazy. There's some stuff that like, I probably could if I was, a different, let me rephrase that. I think there's some features that I look at that maybe aren't the best, like holistically for a narrative game like ours, but I don't mind those so much because I really do enjoy how monks feel in combat, and how there's like a defined flavor within monks, but also a very accepted like external flavor. Like the traditional monk is very much like sort of like Shaolin monk, study at a temple kind of thing. And almost everybody seems to accept that like really any kind of pugilist is a monk when you get right down to it. And I love that space. I don't know when, I don't know where, sometime during Dice Funk, I'm going to make a boxing character and they're also going to be a monk. Like it's just going to happen. I'm telling you now.
Yeah. I mean, Dan was showing me that there's some kind of separate homebrew pugilist character. And I mean, Dan obviously is much more interested in a wide variety of games. I was like, why would you just be a monk? But, there's people to get different things out of systems. So I've always found monk intimidating. It just seems like you have to keep track of and think of so many things. Even switching from Hylia to Killings, I'm like, fighter was the bomb. I just said, I attack I attack every time. It's so easy.
I mean, that is more or less where monks are, but I think the interesting decision point with monks is what to do with your bonus action. I've kind of messed it up once or twice during the season, so I apologize. But the general idea is that you get one of a couple different options using your bonus action. And those can be really good for like deciding how you're going to sort of even flavor a fight. Like I tried to make it so that the different fights Reaper had in the tournament, she used a different strategy. So she didn't just do, because I think the optimal one is always spend a key point to do stunning strike, especially in our show. Like it just mathematically, I should be attempting to stun lock every enemy, but I was like, that's not really exciting. So what can I tell more in a story where she's dodging instead, or she's trying to get extra attacks in, like she's trying to burn them down before they can burn her down kind of move?
Yeah, actually, I want to talk about the tournament. One of our last questions here from Dustin Darkwater, Miles and Danny love Dice Funk forever, and a good Brent Twitter bitch for Let's Talk About Snacks podcast. How did you feel about the World's Fair tournament? I kind of did that completely unexpected. It was not like an arc I had planned. It was because of Reaper suggesting it, and then I really wanted to deliver because I know fighting is important to Reaper, so it felt like you were in your element. You know, like the first arc was like a detective investigation that has nothing to do with you, and then there was like a religious pilgrimage, nothing to do with you. So I was really trying to pay off for your character and give you a variety of different fights to show off your stuff. And I didn't know you were going to win. I hoped, and you did, but like you could have got knocked out. So I'm curious how that all felt for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, always thanks, like, because that wasn't something I had intended for Reaper either. That was just like a joke I think I said at some point during the Kilpatrick scene. I was like, what if we solve it with the martial arts tournament? And then you were like, yeah, what if we do that? And
that's the Dice Funk difference. You won't see that in any of those shows. They won't just throw all their shit in the garbage and do a dark tournament.
Those fucking cowards over there at their dropout TVs and their whatever their other things are.
Yeah. Oh, what? You're more successful? Blah-de-da.
Oh, you make a career off of yours. Well, isn't that nice? We have integrity.
Yeah, we're the, what was it, the beach... We're the beach squenders or whatever you said earlier of podcasting.
Schmoodles.
Yeah, we don't need success or popularity.
Some would say you're actually the sad one when you think about it. What was the question again? I'm sorry.
How does Quinn and how does Reaper feel about how the tournament went down? It was a nice variety of fights, different situations.
It was fun. There was a nice variety of fights. There were nice sort of mechanics to fights. It's always one of the things I consider like a fear when it comes to DMing, partially because I spent a lot of time playing 4th edition in my life, and one of the aspects to 4th edition was that combat had a very sluggish, repetitive sort of feel to it when you did it for a lot of times. So there is that always like the constant worry in my mind. I'm like, have I added anything to this combat counter to make it exciting? Like either the stakes or an extra mechanic or something, extra narratively going on that like, this isn't just a boring like number versus number kind of situation, which are the ones I try to avoid. And I think you did a really good job of like making each fight feel unique. There were like characters of different levels and sort of like, JoJo-esque fights to, straight up just like, here's the numbers, can you beat them before they beat you? And those are all really, really cool.
Yeah, I'm glad I can basically remember them all in some detail or like the narrative of them, right? Like you came out and you just started whipping the shit out of the shark and it was like really embarrassing. But then near the end, he actually started landing some hits on you and it was like, oh shit. It was a little closer than it looked. And then there was the fight against Lucius where he was one turn away from almost certainly killing you because he was using magic missile, which never misses, which like made it seem like this, encroaching wall of doom, just like this unstoppable force. And you just had to like outrace it.
It's just a pure answer. Like at some point, I only have so many hit points. So there is an inevitable end to this. There is no lucky dice at this point.
Yeah, and then of course maybe the character highlight was the fight against Boyce, where you had the sportsmanship and so forth, and Gowdy got involved. I'm curious if Skitch had gone all out in like strategy, if it was possible to win, because obviously physically your character is much stronger. I don't know if you had like the spell loadout for it or what. But, I mean you whipped him really badly.
I think there is a space that fight could have been like a Usopp versus Luffy from One Piece moment. If nobody knows what I'm talking about, there's a character who essentially holds off the main character of the series using just like traps and like really quick thinking for a while and like really ingenious stuff. I think that I tried to set it up that Reaper would kind of give that opportunity by like making space for stuff like that, but I don't think that was narratively where the fight was going. So it was also just her being like, I am going to give you a sporty chance because I am like, once I get in, it's going to be tough to get rid of me.
Yeah, you just completely made everyone realize how badass you are. which is good for you because I mean you had been through a lot, like Reaper, getting knocked down early, then basically watching a kid die at a church. Like I think there was a version of it where you'd fully become that Shadow the Hedgehog in the rain gif, where you're just like too depressed to go on. So I like that you got to win.
I think it's actually very funny because you bring up one thing I guess I've never really had Reaper consider a process, is that she did just watch a child get eaten. And I think I had her reaction be like, oh, cool. And like, that really is the mentality I had her carry that through. She really was not traumatized by that moment. She was just like, awesome. Like, go back to training, I suppose.
Well, that's an incredible segue for our final question from Midlife Stasis, Conduit of Inevitability, Dr. Goatman, and Francois V. A deleted scene in Everything Everywhere All at Once. Going into these final wet arcs and then whatever the epilogue looks like, is there anything you want the audience to keep an eye out for characterization-wise? Like, is there anything you're foreshadowing or you want them to have, like, caught on to where you're going? Something like what you just said about not being fazed by a child being eaten, which I think is important because your character is like, fundamentally wants to do good and help people, but you do seem to have been, raised in like a sociopathic kind of atmosphere.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there are conversations that Reaper will have, and there are some conversations that I'm glad I was able to get for my character. I don't know if I was waiting for like, oh, is there a perfect spot to fit this in or something like that. Eventually I was just like, one day I was like, I'm just going to have this conversation now. And it ended up working, I think, pretty appropriately for where we were going. So I'll say there's some important Reaper conversations to give a little bit of context to who she is a little bit more. I've given a little bit of a clue as to, an aspect of her character that I wanted to touch on a little bit more. But I will say, not really necessarily a spoiler to say, she's eventually going to come into conflict with her master. That's not like a weird cliffhanger we're never going to give you. And I will say that it has, I think, a really surprising ending. It wasn't necessarily one I would have like written down on the whiteboard at the start of things. So yeah, I'm hoping everybody, stays tuned and is excited for it, because I know I'm really excited to explore it.
Yeah, I mean, it was her stated motivation from very early on. I think in like the second episode, maybe Reaper like growled like, "I can't die until I get I defeat him or whatever." So like you've always been talking about it, but you've also been pretty light on details. I know Hylia's like, "Oh, do you respect this guy? Do you like want to beat him to like so he'll be proud of you?" Or you're like, "No, fuck him, he's an asshole." And then I think recently the downtime with Lillian, where you're like, what is this family that you speak of? But you've never just come out and said like, oh, here's what he did or said. I don't know. Maybe it's just because sometimes you play it to the chest emo style, or it's like Reaper just doesn't have the words. Like, I don't think she's been to therapy.
Sure. I mean, there is one aspect that I always try to avoid getting too much into like super specifics, especially when it comes to trauma in a show like this. So I'm never going to be like very specifically like, here is the stated abuse my character suffered under this. But I think, there are sort of like strong inclinations based off of what Reaper says. And then once you see her master, you'll be like, yeah, things are making a little sense now, about her character. And I think part of that has been a really good writing job on your half, where you've responded to the things my character has said and incorporated them into something that's interesting and captivating. Like, you have to follow up when my character says those things. So I think a lot of the credit needs to go to you. Maybe more than me, even.
That's too kind of you. I mean, it's kind of a writing cheat I do. Honestly, it's just listen to what the characters say and then just have that be true later. It's a really it's
You'd
kind
be
of a
surprised
shortcut.
how hard that is for a lot of people, though. I mean, that's not always the easiest thing to like incorporate.
But yeah, like I feel like I didn't have to do that much original creation for Master Evers. Like you gave me the tools, about you're like, oh, I'm a shadow monk. I'm from the darkness, the darkest, deepest blackness. I was like, okay, well that, there's just like an oceanographic like place to take that. That's very obvious. And then you have all these values. Why do you have these values? So part of that felt like it just came to me gift wrapped. So I mean, maybe it was just a kind of unspoken collaboration. But we've been working together so long now, sometimes we can just pass the ball without looking.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely happens. There's definitely that. I usually know if I leave a little hole in something that Austin will will take that opportunity to fill it up with something. And in the case where I'm like, this is specifically what I want to have happen, that there's always still like the curious little twist you can add into it or something like that. So nothing's ever, 100% expected. There's always something kind of like improvisational to react on.
Yep. And I think that's going to wrap us up. No, wrap up the questions. We are unwrapped. You can get wrapped if you want to, Quinn. I'm going to probably remain unwrapped tonight.
I would love to get wrapped. I need someone to wrap me up. I don't know what to tell you.
You can hear more about this on Spewpunk, our bonus show for only $1.
I mean, again, look, we're doing a disservice to ourselves to not promote anything at all. Yes, Spewpunk once again. Go check it out. Very, very fun. If you enjoy these levels of conversations, we have dumber ones on Spewpunk.
Much dumber.
But we have a lot of fun there as well. There's a lot of good episodes. Bad Saw, always a classic.
I love Bad Saw. He's supposed to play a game. Come on.
Yeah, he's trying real hard. In this economy, Saw's fun to run. So yeah, there's a lot of cool things out there. Hear about movies we're watching. Dan sometimes pops on. He'll talk about, little miniatures, and apparently not Bloomburrow at all. So that's, again, an interesting little thing I'll have to figure out at some point. But I hope everybody has been enjoying this season of Dice Funk so far. It means a lot to hear all the nice things I do hear. Because as Austin mentioned, I really was legitimately very, very nervous at the start of this season. It's not that this is my first time DMing. I've DM'd for probably close to like a decade. And a couple of those times have even been on recording, like streamed live. So like there's even like a barrier here that I knew could help. But there's like, there's a concern because one, I know that there's so much legacy and work you've put into this show that I'm like, I don't want to put out something substandard. And then there's also just like the nervousness of, wanting to create something that an audience will find fun. I hear our audience talk all the time about like their favorite moments and characters from the show. And I'm not even thinking about like, how can I stand amongst them? I'm like, how do I just not embarrass them? So that's what that's my goal, and everything else I consider extra credit, really.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm your friend, so I'm going to be supportive. But like, even if we weren't that close, I'd be like, oh, I really was jealous of the ACH vibe check. You did such a good job there. I wish I had done something like that. Like I think your first arc was much more dynamic than mine. Like I think you're doing a great job. So take those compliments for as well as you can. I know your instinct is to parry them away like Sekiro.
Yes.
But
a game I'm not good at, but weirdly enough, instinctively can do.
Yeah. But we'll be back with Dice Funk every Sunday, Spewpunk whenever we can, and Crew Gunk probably once an arc-ish. We have now talked to all the players about their player characters. I guess I could do a Killings episode now separately, or we could revisit. I could go back to Stranger and be like, how do you feel about the development? Or we could do old characters from previous seasons. Let us know, wherever you comment, how your preference. Probably the Discord is the easiest, but that is the schedule. Quinn, I'm going to be visiting you soon in Harrisburg, where we will play Gathering the Magic, and we'll be able to talk about that. But I think it's going to be, like a week before the next Spewpunk, probably. Maybe we'll get one in before I get on a plane, but probably not for the time I'm up there.
Yeah, I can't guarantee anything right now, but we'll always try to give our audience as much content as possible. It's always very important. Everyone seems to enjoy it, and we like to give you little surprises, Austin likes to do a good job. I like to get called a good girl. We're both, we're both looking for what we're aiming for here. And we'll have some cool stuff, I think. I'm excited to hang out with Austin, too.
Yeah, it's going to be great. We're definitely not going to be high the whole time. We're going to be normal and regular in public.
Look, I'm just going to say I stocked up ahead of time. And I have some that are considered more social, and some that are considered more hang out on the couch-ish. So it's up to you guys to decide how you want to go about it.
We're going to take you to long legs while you are seeing into the fifth dimension and truly change who you are as a person.
First and foremost, I'm going to see long legs tomorrow on an edible with my sister. So
hell yeah.
I have no idea what the movie's about. I hear people say it's a horror. Somebody said it's about murder mystery or something like that. I have no idea beyond that. And I was like, look, I'm better at seeing like horror movies and stuff that like I found out through Tatan, like I could do it, like the stuff that's unnerving and gory and gross and stuff like that. Like, you know, if I'm on an edible or something like that, I could chill out a little bit more. So I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to find out.
If this is the last episode ever uploaded to this feed, you know what happened. Long legs got Quinn.
Oh my gosh. Oh no, they can. I'm so precious.
Reaching out to catch the sun, to hold it in arms, longing for something strong, to hide a weakness, the light may disappear.